Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the beginning of the 2031 season, won our opening day game against the Expos, took an early lead 3 to nothing, gave it all back to trail 4 to 3 heading into the top of the 8th. Single runs in the 8th and the ninth, highlighted by a game-winning home run by Dansby Swanson, led our Buffalo Wings to a victory over Montreal in the first game of the year. So now we are going to begin simming through the season. A few things that we are keeping an eye on. Right now, we've got three pretty important players on the injured list. Vance Honeycutt, our left fielder, recovering from a torn UCL suffered last September that forced him to miss the playoffs. About 1 week left, and then he can begin a rehab assignment. Left-handed reliever Caleb Ferguson, who we picked up in a trade this past offseason, got hurt during spring training, going to be out another 1 to 2 weeks. And then Toshimitsu Kato, who is the best defensive infielder we have, at least historically, over the last year or two. Issue is he doesn't hit that much, so unclear exactly what his role is going to be when he recovers from that fractured shoulder blade, but he is out for another 3 to 4 weeks anyways. So certainly the additions of Honeycutt and Ferguson should be helpful. The addition of Honeycutt will allow Cam Collier, who we brought on board in a big trade this past offseason, to be our third baseman. He is our right fielder right now. We just need a little more offense in the outfield. We don't have a great outfield at this point, and we have plenty of infielders. So that has pushed him into a corner outfield spot. Once Honeycutt is back, Collier will move to third base, and then we'll need to decide exactly what happens at shortstop between the like of Nick Allen, Dansby Swanson, and potentially even Kato down the line. So we will see how those recoveries go over the next few weeks. Hopefully we can get this Wings season off to a good start. Financially, we've sold about 1,000 more season tickets than a year before. Fan loyalty, we did get a bump this past season, which was our 5th in the majors. So we've got great fan loyalty, 100 fan interest right now, still dealing with the issues of that small market size in Buffalo. Clearly that is not something that is going to likely change, but loyalty and fan interest were at a pretty good spot, so hopefully we can maximize the amount of money that we are generating this year. And as some of you have pointed out, hopefully if we can deliver a profitable season to ownership, maybe that increases the chance that we can get off of this $220 to $230-ish million budget treadmill that we've been on for the last 4 or 5 years. Seems like that's kind of about the maximum that we're ever going to have in Buffalo, which puts us in the upper end of the lower half of the league in terms of our budget, so certainly not a horrible spot to be, but would certainly love if we could get this budget up to $250 million eventually, but going to have to be much more profitable in the accounting ledgers and probably even more successful on the field. Have made the playoffs 3 of the 5 years that we have been the general manager in Buffalo. Missed the playoffs our first 2 years, lost in the LCS 3 years ago. Each of the last 2 years we lost in the divisional series. We were projected to be also slightly over 500 this season, as we were last year when we ran the simulation. They said we would sneak into a playoff spot again this year. Clearly our hope is to win more than the 83 games that we won a year ago. Obviously get back into the playoffs and then see what can happen if we do get a chance to play in the postseason again this year. And our Wings are off to a good start, 5-2 after the first week or so of the season. Vance Honeycutt now finally healthy, ready to start his rehab assignment. Unfortunately, as we had kind of feared, he comes back fragile from that injury. He's not even yet 28 years old. He is a guy who is still arbitration eligible, expected to make about $8 million next year. As we've talked about in the past, over the course of his major league career with us, he's been a very consistent offensive player. WRC pluses between 120 and 127 over the course of his 4 years in the majors. Obviously, last year was cut short by that injury that we talked about. Question now, with him being fragile, is what type of long-term commitment we want to consider making to him. We're obviously going to scout him now while he works on that rehab assignment in Albany, see if anything has changed materially as far as his batting or his defensive ratings coming off of that UCL injury. It wouldn't be unrealistic for his arm to be a little weaker. But we will see what he looks like when we scout him again. You can see we scouted him back at the end of spring training, but obviously he hasn't picked up a bat or a glove or a ball in any significant action since he injured himself last September. So it is conceivable that his scouting report will be a little different now that he's getting some action. Don't love the fact that he is fragile. That said, he still has been a very consistent offensive player for us over the years, as we've talked about. And certainly if we move on from him at some point, there's going to be a lot to replace because he's had over 20 home runs and close to 40 stolen bases each of the last 3 seasons for us. So hopefully he remains a productive offensive player for this season and next season, while we still have his rights through arbitration. Longer term than that, we'll see how he does with this fragile injury proneness, and we'll see what his scouting report looks like before we need to make a decision on whether he's going to be a long-term member of the Buffalo Wings or someone who we look to move on from when he starts making some significant money and approaching his 30s. And just as the injury news seemed to be getting better with Honeycutt and then Caleb Ferguson both starting their rehab assignments, Dansby Swanson going to be out with a strained oblique for about 5 weeks. Has hit .243 for us, 1 homer and 2 ribbies. The homer, obviously, the game-winning solo home run in the top of the 9th of the opening day of the season. So Swanson with this strained oblique, what that may mean is that we may not even really need to game the system to prevent his 135 games played vesting option from kicking in. We talked about in the last episode that we had viewed him as our starting shortstop when we traded for him this past offseason at the beginning of November. We believed he was a 65 defensive player, which he had been for the course of his career. And every time we've scouted him since then, it seems like he is just regressing very quickly now in his mid to late 30s. So I talked in the last episode about how he's probably not our starting shortstop, unfortunately, but we were going to try to potentially turn him into a potential third baseman for us, more likely a utility infielder with a decent bat and the versatility to play a number of positions, because his previous team, Nashville, would have been keeping 60% of his salary. Even then, $8 million a year if we really viewed him as a utility infielder, which I think he probably is at this point, despite the fact that I do like his plus home run power and his plus I. $8 million would have been high for that, but it turns out that the vesting option, with the fact that he's going to be out for another 5 weeks, appears pretty unlikely to kick in at this point. He's probably going to miss a good close to 30 games, which will mean that there's no way it can kick in. Obviously, we'll have a few off days there, so he may not miss quite that many. But seems likely that Swanson will be a free agent after this season. Perhaps there's an opportunity for him to realize what he is at this point in terms of his ability, and maybe sign with us before he hits free agency for a much more reasonable contract for a utility infielder. Another interesting thing that I just noticed, and I don't know if it's because he's out with the injury, but he had a captain personality trait during our last episode, and it appears that he has lost that. I don't know if that's because he's not performing the same way and he's not rated the same way that he was in the past, and his teammates respect him less. I don't know if it's just because he has the injury and he is going to be out, but it is kind of interesting that it appears that that has disappeared. He definitely had a captain personality as of the start of the season, so kind of interesting to see that those can be lost. I've never noticed that before, although presumably it probably has happened to me at some point over my years of playing OOTP. So Swanson will head to the IL. That will probably accelerate our move of Cam Collier back to third base. You can see he has not been hitting much while playing right field for us, but looking forward to getting that glove of Collier's back to third base. Not going to bring Honeycutt up right away. He's only had 2 games and is 1 for 7 at this point. He totally missed spring training with the injury also, so I think he needs a little more time down in Albany to be ready to go. But we'll find somebody to replace Swanson for the near term and move Collier back to third base and start trying to envision what this lineup is really going to look like going forward for the bulk of this season. And for the near term, we're going to bring up Jamari Baylor, a guy that we signed to a minor league contract just about a month ago, playing in AAA Albany for us. And he does have 7 home runs and 11 ribbies in 12 games. Seems to have a bit of a hot bat right now. Certainly has some home run power. He can play a number of infield positions, a couple of outfield positions. Not a big-time part of our future, closing in on 31 years of age, but a guy who maybe if he plays a little bit over the next few days can luck into a home run or 2 for us. And it looks like Katu is recovering much quicker than expected from that fractured shoulder blade, which is also positive, particularly with the injury to Swanson. I think that increases the chance that he will get an opportunity to return to the major league team. We also got an updated report on Tim Hull, who we mentioned in our last episode as a guy who could become our shortstop of the not so distant future. We've got him playing third base in Albany right now just to make him as versatile as possible. Hitting only .217 in his first 46 at-bats in AAA. Clearly has some growth that we hope will continue to happen, but with that 70 range, definitely a guy who we think can be helpful in our infield in the coming years. And hopefully with the contact and the gap power potentially both being above average and a little bit of speed, hopefully can hit enough to stay in a lineup. Not going to hit a ton of home runs, but also not completely useless in that regard either, particularly if that ticks up to a 45. So could be a decent average-ish offensive player with 70 infield range, which is a useful major leaguer as far as I'm concerned. And we've got a new scouting report back on Vance Honeycutt, so let's see what he looks like coming off of this injury now. Doesn't really look all that different, so that is positive to see. Contact, power, eye, kind of all where we thought they were. His defense doesn't look any different. His outfield ratings, still got a below average arm, still has some good speed. So it seems like the big change from that torn UCL is the fact that he's fragile now in terms of his injury proneness, which is certainly not good, but could definitely be worse if his ratings kind of took a deep dive, and it doesn't appear that they have at this point. Wonder where Marcelo Meyer is in terms of his injury. We'll check in on him. He looks like he might be in a rehab assignment. And yeah, Marcelo Meyer, it looks like the fear that we had with him has taken place. He's wrecked physically now rather than fragile. Looks like we scouted him right at the end of spring training. Doesn't appear that his batting ratings have taken much of a hit. We're going to go ahead and just request an updated scouting report on him now. That it looks like he's just starting his rehab assignment as of today. So hopefully we'll remember to check in on that about a week from now. But part of the reason we traded him away this offseason was to get the big contract that he has for the next several years off of our books. And part of the reason we wanted to do that was that we feared after a second major injury to his actually, I could find that better if I would look at his injury history. Second major injury to his left elbow. 3-month injury a few years ago, fractured elbow, end of last season. That he would come back wrecked physically, and it looks like that is the case. So unfortunately, the 28-year-old Marcelo Meyer likely to continue to have a pretty significant challenge remaining in the lineup regularly over the course of the rest of his career. And a Rule 5 pick from last year, Rafael Rodillo, hitting .292 in very limited action for us this year. He's got one active Rule 5 day left, so he is likely to be the guy who we will send down when we're ready to bring Honeycutt back. We have put Jamari Baylor into the lineup. He went 0 for 3 his first game with us, struck out a couple times, did draw a walk. But we want to ensure that the 24-year-old Rodillo is getting regular playing time, and particularly now that we aren't going to need to keep him at the major league level. And I think particularly once Vance Honeycutt is back and manning his regular position in left field, playing time going to be even harder for Rodillo to come by at the major league level. So once we have the luxury of putting him back in the minors or putting him into the minors for the first time with us other than a rehab assignment, I think we will take advantage of that as well. And obviously we're not playing as well lately. 7-6 record. We were 5-2. We were then 7-4. So we've lost a few games in a row at this point, 3 in a row, and you can see we're a game and a half behind the Marlins in these early stages of the 2031 season. And we did get our scouting report back on Marcelo Meyer. He's only played one game in Lexington, but obviously we were there. Batting profile looks broadly similar. Defensive profile looks broadly similar to where it was before. So it doesn't seem that the second injury to his left elbow has really significantly impacted the player that he is on the field. The issue and the fear that we had was that it would likely impact how often he would be on the field. And given that he is now wrecked physically, that does seem to unfortunately be the case. And Vance Honeycutt has had only 5 games on his rehab assignment, just 3 hits and 17 at-bats, does have a home run now. But I think we need that bat up at the major league level. And as I mentioned, Rodillo now is no longer forced to go back to his previous team. He has enough major league service with us at this point that his rights are the property of the Buffalo Wings organization. So we are going to demote him down to AAA Albany and bring up Mr. Honeycutt to hopefully give our offense a boost. And the first month of the season is in the books for our Buffalo Wings, 13-9 record, second place in the National League East, just half a game behind the Marlins, tied with the Phillies. So the season is off to a pretty reasonable start. Taking a look at the league leaders, doesn't look like we have too much on the batting side. Sean Sullivan, our fifth starter, is 2-0 with a 1.90 ERA, so a nice start to the season for Mr. Sullivan. We've honestly gotten better performances from our fourth and fifth starters, Hayden Yinger and Sean Sullivan. Andrew Painter and Harleen Susanna have been pretty disastrous so far, and Otani has been very pedestrian in his performance. Fortunately, the bullpen, at least in terms of our ERAs, has been excellent so far. Everyone except Bryce Miller has an ERA below 3 in the bullpen, and even Miller at 3.38 has been certainly respectable in terms of that number. Taking a look at the team statistics, no surprise, first in the National League in bullpen ERA at 1.48. And the starters actually rank fifth despite that 4.62 ERA. So it looks like there's just a lot of runs being scored in the National League this first month of the 2031 season, because we are first overall in ERA, first in runs allowed, and you can see we are in the top handful in most of the pitching categories, and our defensive efficiency and our zone rating also improved this year. The offense, not great, rank 11th with 95 runs scored. Our 13-9 record, right in line with Pythagorean expectations. And you can see we're kind of a middle-of-the-pack team in a lot of offensive categories. Rank last in the league with just 16th walks, which is certainly not optimal. Take a look at just some top performers in terms of our batting statistics and WAR on the season. Jamari Baylor has done a great job since he came up to us. Well, not a great job. Actually, that's not true. That's including his minor league statistics, which I don't want, so I need to fix that. So we've switched that to just look at major league stats. Deshaun Seifu hitting 289, 9 doubles and 2 triples. And he's also stolen 5 bases for us. Tied for the team lead in WAR at 0.7 with center fielder John Featherston, who's hitting 297. Also a couple triples, a couple of home runs. Basallo continues to hit for good power, 6 homers, 11 ribbies, has struck out 23 times. And Vance Honeycutt hitting 250, but does have 3 homers and limited action. Ota also 6 homers and 11 RBIs, similar to Basallo. Disappointment so far offensively would be Cam Collier, the third baseman. 274 batting average, but his OPS plus well below average. 1 home run and 3 doubles. Certainly would hope for a little more in terms of extra base hits from him. And Adley Rutschman having a difficult season so far. He's actually been a negative WAR player for us, which is a bit of a surprise, hitting just 211, and he's struck out 20 times. Taking a look at his ratings, they kind of are pretty similar to what they've always been. Don't really have any fear that when all is said and done, we believe he's still the same player he's pretty much always been for us, so think that he will get things turned around. So the fact that Rutschman and Collier, 2 of our top players, typically our second batter in the order in Collier, and then Rutschman, depending on the lineup, right in the middle also. You can see we hit him third right now against righties, clean up against lefties. The fact that those guys haven't produced much offensively, and we are still 13-9, hopefully a sign that the type of pace that we're playing this season is definitely sustainable, and we can be a contender for the National League East this year. And we just suffered a pretty significant injury. Closer Andres Munoz, torn rotator cuff, out for the year. He was 1-1 this year with 7 saves in 10 games. 180 ERA, strikeout per inning. So certainly going to be a big loss for our bullpen. We do at least have the ability to bring up a more than competent major league pitcher with Caleb Ferguson, who's now been pitching for a little over 2 weeks with Albany, and he hasn't allowed a run over 6 innings pitched in 6 games. So we've got a good replacement in our system, but clearly losing our closer for the season, losing a guy that we're spending $10 million a year on and only getting 10 innings pitched out of him, so $1 million per inning pitched this year is not the type of payroll efficiency we were hoping for with Mr. Munoz, but his season is absolutely over at this point. And unfortunately, those are the breaks. And the month of May has been going really well for Buffalo so far here on May 20th. Taking a look at the standings, we are up 3.5 games in the NL East on the Marlins now. 25-14 record, one of the top records in baseball, competing with the likes of the Royals and the Reds and the Astros for the best record in the league. You can see Deshaun Seifu now tied for the league lead in steals. Hayden Yinger leading the NL with a 1.80 ERA. Harley and Susanna tied for second in the league with 5 wins. So a few guys on the leaderboards for us. We have been shopping the closer Andres Munoz, who we owe $10 million this year, $10 million next year, and then there's a team option for $15 million the year after that. Don't think it's an exorbitant contract for a reliever, but at this point, given that he's out for all of this year with that torn rotator cuff, he's going to come back for $10 million next year at the age of 33. Who knows exactly what he's going to look like after that injury. Still should be a pretty productive pitcher, but just having $10 million sitting on our payroll doing nothing for us for the rest of this year in a year that we are trying to compete is not an optimal situation. So don't feel like we want to just dump him for nothing, but if we can get something mildly useful in return and get the majority of his contract off of our books this year and next year, still something that we're going to continue exploring. Thus far, there haven't been any real compelling options, not surprisingly. And Dansby Swanson is back and healthy, so we're going to send him on a rehab assignment, and we may keep him down there more than a few days. If we're viewing him as a utility infielder for us at this point, it might make sense to train him up at third base and second base to the extent that we can over the 20 games that we're going to have for him in AAA. So he may not be back up with us immediately. We may just try to get him as versatile as possible defensively where the games don't matter as much, given that we're playing pretty well at the major league level right now, despite the fact that we don't have a great middle infielder backup for Seifu and Allen. We've been piecing things together with guys like Kyron Paris and Vaughn Necker playing second base and shortstop when we need people, which is not optimal, but seems to be working out okay so far. Obviously, we still also have Kato down there who we could bring up for a glove. Just don't know that his bat is ever going to be good enough to be a major leaguer. So I think the plan over the next couple of weeks is to get Swanson as versatile as possible defensively, and then we'll have to make a roster decision to get him back onto the 26-man roster. And we've made it to June now. Unfortunately, the team has not been playing really well ever since the last time we checked in. We look at the end of the month of May, and only a couple of wins, 3 wins, I guess, so not a couple, but Pittsburgh, Atlanta, and Nashville since we last checked in. So the team struggled a bit towards the end of the month of May. You can see we stand at 28-22 now, half a game behind the Nationals in the National League East. We are third among the 4 teams for the wild card, 2 games up on being out of a wild card spot. although I guess either St. Louis or Cincinnati is actually a division winner also. So we're actually second in the race for the wild card, 2 games up on the final wild card spot right now. Clearly, with where we are in the standings, the goal would be to compete for the National League East title this year. Taking a look at the team stats, did have a winning record again in May at 15-13, but as I talked about, definitely faded down the stretch. 28-22 at this point, right in line with our Pythagorean expectations. The offense not good, 12th in the National League in runs scored. The pitching still very good, 2nd in the National League in runs allowed. Starters ERA 5th in the league, bullpen ERA 2nd in the league. You can see we are in the top handful of the rankings in pretty much every pitching category except for strikeouts. Pretty good defensively. So just need to figure out a way to generate some more offense with this team as this season moves along. And we've been selling out most games, so we are going to boost ticket prices just by 50 cents to $33. See if with the higher fan loyalty that we now have and the still strong fan interest, as well as playing pretty well on the field, if we're able to make a little bit more money. We've previously found that above $32.50 or so is definitely a bit of a breaking point in Buffalo, but we'll at least explore the option since we have been selling out pretty consistently this year. And here on June 9th, 34-24 record, Dansby Swanson has spent his 20 days down on a rehab assignment. You can see he hit .333 over 63 at-bats, 5 homers, 9 ribbies. Not a shock to see a veteran like him doing very well in AAA. But we did train him up a bit in second base and third base. So I think at the very least for the bulk of this season, he can be a pretty good utility infielder for us behind Seifu at second base, Collier at third base, and Nick Allen at shortstop. Certainly not what we anticipated he was going to be when we brought him on board last offseason. But at this point, I think he is by far the best option in the organization for us as a utility infielder. So like the fact that we were able to kind of get him somewhat proficient at those additional positions during this time that he spent in AAA for us. And as we prepare to make room for Swanson and take a look at how things look here on June 9th, tied for first in the National League with the Nationals, National League East with the Nationals. They're ahead of us by percentage points in the standings. I can see Cam Collier has started to turn his season around, batting average up to .302, 7 homers, 25 ribbies. Seifu hitting close to .300 are all as well. Ota and Basallo, each with double-digit home runs. Honeycutt, despite missing all that time, first few weeks of the season, already leading the team in ribbies with 28, hitting .290 with 8 homers for us. And Seifu, not surprisingly, leading the team in stolen bases. Pitching-wise, we've talked about Yinger having an excellent year. Ohtani and Painter also have ERAs below 4. Sean Sullivan has been fine for a 5th starter. Jardín Susana leads the team with 7 wins, but his ERA certainly leaves a bit to be desired. At this point, Munoz is the major injury that we are dealing with at this point. Taking a quick look at the minor leagues. Capitals a little bit above average. Utica Club not having a great season. High A Jamestown having a solid year. Marathon just a bit over 500. And the rookie league teams just getting action underway over the last day or so. So early stages as far as our minor league season, particularly in rookie ball. We're going to have the draft coming up in about a week and a half, so we're going to spend a little bit of time highlighting some of the top prospects there before we finish off the episode. We are picking, better than we have in recent years, but still with the 23rd pick in the draft, likely not going to see one of these top prospects fall to us, but you never know. We can always hope. And to make room to bring up Mr. Swanson, we are going to DFA Jamari Baylor, the minor league free agent signing. Got off to that fast start in Albany, as we talked about when we first brought him up, with 7 homers and 46 at-bats. Has had a little bit of pop with us, 5 homers and 23 ribbies and 144 at-bats. He's gotten a fair amount of playing time as our starting right fielder. That being said, you look at his numbers, and he has certainly been a below-average offensive player. I think we can piece together right field for the time being, with Mason Neville potentially in the mix, Vaughn Necker getting some time in a corner outfield spot, even Kyron Paris potentially getting some action there. So Baylor, we are going to always hope there's some loophole, but as I mentioned, we were going to have to waive and DFA him, and that will enable us to get Mr. Swanson back up to the Major League roster, but we will not be force starting Mr. Swanson anymore. He is likely to be a super utility guy for us at the Major League level at this point. And as I work to figure out the rosters and the lineups with input from Carlos Crawford, our bench coach, Swanson is going to be our utility infielder most of the time against right-handed pitching, but we're actually going to play him at third base against left-handed pitching, push Cam Collier back out to right field. Feel that gives us the best offense possible, gets a little more playing time for Swanson while still letting him be the typical backup at second, third, and short to Seifu, Collier, and Allen against right-handed pitching. We talked about the addition of Crawford a bit in the offseason, brought him on board, promoted him from within the organization, and do feel that the fact that he's got good relationships with all of our pitchers and he doesn't have bad relationships with anybody is a nice upgrade in the clubhouse from our previous bench coach, who had good relationships with all the hitters generally, but bad relationships with all the pitchers. So at least I think Crawford being on board hopefully is a small part of why our pitching staff has been so good this season. And one other thing I had talked about in the off-season episodes was that I did up the amount of international signings. And you can see we have a 20-man international complex now, so we have been finding more random signings. Now, granted, most of these are guys with no potential, but at least we are getting some bodies now who can fill out our DSL team in particular. And obviously, we've got the handful of top prospects that we have picked up largely through international amateur free agency over the past few seasons. We did something a little different this past period when we actually picked up 4 guys in international amateur free agency at the start of this year. And we've made it to the draft. As I mentioned, the Wings going to be picking 23rd. Take a quick look at the standings here and see how things look as we approach the midpoint of the season. In the National League East, we are up a game and a half on the Nationals right now, and we are half a game behind the Cardinals for the best record in the National League. The mighty Kansas City Royals at 47-22, the best team in baseball. They are 5.5 up on the Cardinals for the best record in baseball. Hopefully, there will not be a rematch of the 1985 World Series between the Royals and the Cardinals. We would love to be representing the National League this year, and we are certainly in the mix at this point as we close in, as I mentioned, on the halfway point of the year. Deshaun Seifu, only 22 stolen bases, so he's actually pretty far well behind Jay Allen at this point. But Jay Allen suffering from a broken bone in his elbow right now, going to be out for 8 months, just got hurt very recently. So Seifu likely to get past him in terms of stolen bases. Looking at his season, a bit of a bounce back year offensively, hitting 288. Already has 19 doubles and 6 triples this year to go with those 22 steals. Above average offensively, 1.7 WAR on the season. So it looks like he's not going to have quite the season he did 2 years ago, but certainly when all is said and done this year, he looks like he's definitely on pace for a better offensive season than the one that he had a year ago. Taking a look at the pitchers, and nobody among the top 3 in the league in any of the big pitching categories at this point from our pitching staff. As I mentioned, we will be picking 23rd in the draft, so unlikely that any of these top prospects are going to be available. But we'll take a look at them just to give you a quick glance at some of the players who might be available for us. Just 4 5-star pitching prospects. Jake Blimeister. He's going to be a reliever if that changeup doesn't develop, so that's going to be critical to happen for him. He's also looking for a lot of money at $11.5 million. Control looks borderline. Got a chance to be major league average in terms of his control. Do like his personality, but with the amount of money he's looking for, the uncertainty whether that changeup will actually develop, have a hard time believing he would be a guy that we would grab, even if he somehow does fall to us at number 23. Nim Gabbard, another starting pitching prospect, 18 years old. He's already fragile physically. Does potentially have a 5 to 6 pitch arsenal, so that's pretty attractive. Ground ball pitcher, already throwing in the low to mid 90s, decent personality. Somebody I would definitely consider, Rome, New York, so he's probably from 3-ish hours away from Buffalo, so don't know if he's a hometown guy, but the fans with our AA Utica team would certainly love to see him on that team in a few years if we ended up with him. Kevin McGovern, another starting pitching prospect, another guy who's fragile, little more problematic personality than the other guys, potential 3-pitch arsenal. Has obviously been a dominant player in terms of his performance in high school. And Zach Tashida, a little bit older, already 19 years old, like the high work ethic, another guy who's going to be dependent upon that changeup developing to avoid just becoming a reliever. So I think if any of these guys were around, the somewhat local product Nim Gabbard would probably be the one that we would be most interested in bringing on board. But even with him, he is fragile physically, and who knows what we're going to get at a 23rd pick in the draft. You may have to suck it up and go for a player who's fragile physically, but the amount of money he's looking for also makes him a little more difficult for us to bring on this year, unless we do end up executing a trade to get Munoz off of our books. McGovern, the other option, but also fragile. Don't love the personality. Big thing he has going for him among these compared to these other 3 top pitchers is that he is looking for a manageable amount of money for Buffalo. And I do tend to find that, at least according to our scout, there is a lot more high-end potential talent available in these drafts once you get 5 to 10 years into the game, compared to those first early drafts in the game, where sometimes finding high-end talent is a little more difficult. I guess I should characterize that as potential high-end talent. But you can see our scout sees about 12.5 guys who have 5-star potential, so we'll take a quick look at them. Would assume that the vast majority of these guys will be gone by the time we're picking. That said, it's certainly conceivable that between the 4 or 5-star pitchers and the, again, 18-ish or so 5-star potential position players that are available, a few of them will fall through to us with the 23rd pick in the draft. So it's definitely conceivable that someone we're looking at right now will be available for us when we do pick. Center fielder Mike Allen looks like a pretty interesting hitting prospect. Probably more of a right fielder in a perfect scenario, like the high work ethic, hit over 500 every year of his high school career with decent power. Pretty interesting bat. I would doubt that he'll be around when we are picking, although he is looking for a lot of money. Ignacio Ayala, first baseman, 6'4", decent ratings for a first baseman. Potentially excellent contact hitter with pretty good home run power. Not a horrible prospect. He could be in the mix. Right fielder Ron Brady, not looking for much money at all, just turned 19 years old. Like his potential bat, like his potential glove as a right fielder as well. Hasn't hit for as much power or as much average as a high schooler as the likes of Allen, but still could be an interesting guy to think about. Third baseman Chris Castaneda, really like the bat if it fully develops. Adequate defensively at third base, tall enough that he could also probably play a decent first base. Could play him in left or right if we had to. Could be somebody to think about. Josh Connors, first baseman, another guy looks like an interesting bat if he completely develops, looking for $13 million. Not a lot of speed, not a ton defensively. Tend to think he's not somebody we would go after given the demand. Edgar Espinoza, another guy looking for pretty big money. He is a potentially interesting bat, almost 22 years old, coming out of Bellarmine University. Good personality, nice arm in the outfield, not the greatest range in the world at 6'4". He could also definitely play first base and not far off from being a major league bat, according to our scout. The issue is for a college player, he's looking for a heck of a lot of money. Typically, a lot of the college guys know that they don't have the option to threaten that they're going to go to college, and their demands tend to be somewhat more reasonable. But he certainly looks like a guy who could help with the hole that we have in the corner outfield in the not so distant future. So certainly somebody to think about. Nehemiah Estwick, shortstop, decent range for an infielder. Honestly, with these ratings, I don't love him at any of the key infield positions. Certainly at 6'4", he could play an excellent first base with those ratings and that size. But great home run power, but the rest of the bat definitely has a lot of development that's going to need to take place for him to be a useful major league hitter. Max Haas, first baseman, another guy, not much fielding, not much speed, decent potential bat, looking for a decent amount of money. Probably not the direction we would go. Tufik Nasor out of South Africa, looking for huge money as a right fielder, like the bat, but I think that money is going to price him out of being an option for us. Another right fielder, Ben Pickle. This is guy more of a profile for us, coming out of Minnesota State University, Mankato. Not looking for a ton of money, just not nearly as developed at this point as the other outfield prospect, the other right fielder we saw from Bellarmine University. The fact that he's not looking for a ton of money works in his favor, but I would hope we could get a little bit better than Ben Pickle with our 23rd pick. Dagobert Sadel, center fielder, looking for a ton of money. Has hit over 500 3 straight years in high school. Dual German citizenship. If everything develops, could be an interesting bat. Does have good work ethic and intelligence and adaptability. Certainly looks like he could be a decent corner outfielder down the line. Josh Solorio, another center fielder, like the durability. Decent potential bat if everything works out. Jamir Tezeno, first baseman, typical first baseman, not much defensively, not much speed, but crazy potential home run power if everything works out. Double-digit homers every year of his high school career, although he's coming off of arguably his least productive offensive season as a senior. Tegan Tilley, a shortstop out of Canada. This guy is interesting to me. His competition level is poor, which scares you a bit, but he's not looking for much money. If everything develops, the bat could be interesting. He's at least got 60 infield range, decent bunter, a little bit of speed. If we knew more about his personality and he had a high work ethic, he would be more interesting to me. But with the 23rd pick, if he's available, probably someone we'd consider. Brad Vandergriff, potentially interesting bat, like the durability, a little more range than some of the first base prospects we've looked at. 6'4" size, good leadership, slow. And the last of the 5-star prospects is the center fielder Juan Villapando. Looks like a pretty interesting potential hitting prospect. Also not looking for a ton of money. A little bit of speed, pretty good bunter. More of a corner outfielder profile, probably a left fielder in a perfect scenario. Another guy who I wish we knew a little bit more about his personality, but at least not looking for a crazy amount of money. Could be an interesting guy for us to consider at the 23rd pick. So again, looks like there were actually 16 5-star hitting prospects, as you had the riveting watching experience of watching me count those out manually, but with 16 5-star hitting prospects, as well as the 4 5-star pitching prospects. Simple math tells me that that is 20 5-star prospects according to our scout. So given that we have the 23rd pick in the draft, definitely will be some of those players available. We'll also spend more time when we see who actually is available in our next episode, digging into some of the guys who we think are maybe a little bit more marginal as prospects, but there's another handful of pitchers to think about. And then certainly looking at the batters, there's a fair amount of 4.5-star prospects and a lot of 4-star prospects who probably are going to be some of the players that we end up going with. It's conceivable that there's a guy who our scout thinks is only a 3-star prospect who, based on his profile, we decide to fall in love with and go with. But odds are that will probably not be the case. So we are closing in on the midpoint of the season. We are at the first day of summer. The draft is going to take place, as I mentioned, in our next episode. Quick review of the team statistics. We have improved our offense to 6th in the National League in terms of runs scored. Still very good pitching, ranking 1st in runs allowed. You can see we are the top 3 or 4 in pretty much every pitching category except for strikeouts. Defense still good this year. Seifu leading us to be strong in stolen bases again. Pretty mediocre in base running. The offense has gotten a little better recently. The batting average pretty good. OPS pretty strong. And we're generating a fair amount of extra base hits, helped a bit by our park. 13-6 record in June, so we are playing our best baseball of the year thus far this month of June. And the 41-28 record is exactly lined up where we think we should be and where we expect to be. So can't complain at all about how this season is going so far. Vance Honeycutt definitely bouncing back from that injury that cost him the first few weeks of the season, now leading the team with a 306 average and 38 ribbies. Second behind Seifu with 13 steals, and he's also got 12 homers for us. So Honeycutt is putting up what would potentially be the best season of his career. You can see we do give him a little more rest time and bench him when he is a little bit tired, given that he is now fragile physically. So he's not a guy who's going to be out there for us, 158 games like he was a couple of years ago. At this point in his career, but still looking like a pretty interesting player for us to potentially build around. If we wanted to do a long year extension with him, looking for $20 million a year for 6 years. Given that he's fragile physically and given the financial situation we are in, tend to think we'll keep him year to year at this point. As I mentioned, around $8.5 million potentially next year, $15 million the year after. Positively, particularly given that Dansby Swanson's option will not be vesting. Samuel Basalo's number for next year has been coming down steadily. He has been less productive this year than he has in previous seasons. The batting average 243 and 11 home runs. So the guy who has been a silver slugger each of his 3 seasons at the major league level as the National League DH silver slugger certainly looks like that honor may be in jeopardy this year. But still a useful bat for us. Would hope that he's a little more productive over the course of the remainder of the season than he has been this year. Pretty close to a league average bat for us. We know he doesn't bring much, if anything, to the table defensively. If we can get that OPS plus and WRC plus back closer to his historic levels around 120 over the rest of the season, he could be a guy that we'd consider bringing back. Obviously, if he plays better the rest of the way, that arbitration number likely to go up. So there is an argument to just try to lock him in right now. It's something I'll have to think about. His limitations on the base paths, his limitations defensively, the fact that he's a 26-year-old guy who's really a pure DH, does limit our roster flexibility a bit, but as some of you have noted, he has been a very important offensive player for us over the course of his career, so there's definitely an argument to try to bring him back. Looks like our salary situation is only expected to increase about $10 million next year, and again, Swanson, if it doesn't vest, that basically puts us back to almost where we were. So we've got some interesting decisions to make. Still would love to see if there's an opportunity to get Munoz off of the team. Have been shopping him around generally, also looking for outfielders from time to time since that's a position we could use some help at. Austin Meadows, the 36-year-old, would be a solid corner outfielder for us. Taken on a lot of money to bring him on board, and he is fragile physically, so definitely not a perfect option for us. That said, against right-handed pitching would definitely be an upgrade to what we are currently kind of piecing together in terms of our offense. Emil Santa, decent relief pitcher, but another guy who's making really big money. I wouldn't mind getting Munoz off of the books, but as you can see among the options, Gavin Hollowell is the only one that would actually save us some money. He's a fly ball pitcher with pretty mediocre movement, giving up 4 home runs in 6 innings between AAA and the majors this year, and he also gave up a homer down in AA. So if we could bring on a guy like Austin Meadows and have Seattle keep basically all of his contract, that could be something that could work for us. Don't view Meadows at 36 years old as a long-term solution for us, obviously. Don't love the fragility, but he is still competent defensively, can hit some home runs, definitely knows how to draw a walk, pretty good eye. I don't think, and they may not even have the capacity to keep a huge chunk of his contract. I won't be surprised if they ask for more either, but if we could get Munoz completely off the books and get Meadows for free for the next 2.5 seasons, I would certainly do that. I'm guessing that Seattle will not be impressed with this offer. Well, but they say we're going to hear from them shortly, so they're not dismissing it out of hand. They're probably just going to ask for a top prospect or one of the top players on our team, in addition to Munoz, to get that deal done. But if we could do that, that would help us open up a lot of money and give us at least a proven bat for a corner outfield spot, since right now, as I mentioned, we've got Cam Collier in right, but we could certainly use somebody like Meadows against right-handed pitching, and even against left-handed pitching. Having a guy like him on board could potentially allow us to move Vance Honeycutt to a designated hitter spot, which, given his fragility, would not be the worst thing in the world as far as the wear and tear on him. So the season is going pretty well so far, doing better than the preseason predictions suggested we would be. 69 games into the season, we're already exactly halfway to the 82 wins that we were projected to have. So definitely outplaying our expectations, or outplaying the expectations of the experts. I would say our expectations were definitely that this was better than an 82 win team. So from that perspective, like the fact that we are competing for the NL East, and think that we are doing what we hope to do on the field this year as a team that is still absolutely in win now mode. And we'll find out what we can add in terms of talent for the future in the upcoming Major League Draft in our next episode. If you've got any strong opinions on any of those players that I mentioned earlier, would love to hear them in the comments. And we'll see what we do in the draft for the long term. And then we'll also, in our next episode, start approaching the trade deadline and see if there's any moves that we can make in the short term, whether it's getting Munoz off of the books or adding some other talent to help us this year, to see if we can guide these Wings back into the playoffs for a fourth consecutive year. And we'll find out our continued progress towards that goal in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.